The echo of heels clicking against the polished marble floors of the university hall turned heads as usual. Fatima Mohammed strode down the corridor, her designer dress catching the rays of sunlight streaming in through the windows. Her confidence was magnetic, her poise unmatched. To the girls of Lagos State University, she was a role model. To the boys, she was an enigma they desperately wanted to unravel. "Fatima, you look amazing!" A petite girl with oversized glasses called out, clutching her books to her chest. Fatima barely turned her head, her face frozen in the practiced nonchalance of someone who believed the world beneath her. "Thanks," she replied curtly, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of admiration. "She's so classy," a boy whispered to his friend. "Look at that dress. It's got to be at least 1,000,000 naira." Fatima didn't linger to bask in their adoration. She had mastered the art of silent dismissal, her chin held high as if the world were her runway. She pushed open the glass doors, the sunlight bouncing off her oversized sunglasses, and headed straight to her car, a sleek black Toyota Camry that gleamed in the afternoon sun. With a swift motion, she slid into the driver's seat and revved the engine, ignoring the crowd of admirers who lingered near the parking lot, hoping for a glance, a smile, or even a word. The car sped off, leaving behind a trail of exhaust fumes and a chorus of wistful sighs. The drive back home was a jarring contrast to the grandeur she projected at school. The smooth roads of the university area gave way to pothole-ridden streets. The air grew denser, heavy with the smell of open gutters and grilled suya. Fatima's grip on the steering wheel tightened as she turned into a narrow, unpaved street, lined with makeshift houses and rusted zinc roofs. She parked the car in front of a tiny bungalow whose faded yellow paint peeled off like old scabs. The yard was littered with scraps of paper, and a goat lazily chewed on a pile of discarded plastic. Fatima stepped out, slipping off her heels and putting on a pair of worn-out slippers she had hidden under the car seat. As she entered the house, the creak of the rusty door announced her arrival. "Ah, Fatima, you don't come back?" Her younger brother, Musa, called out from the living room where he sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug doing his homework. "Do I have a choice?" she muttered under her breath, tossing her tattered school bag onto a wooden chair with a broken leg. She headed straight for the kitchen, her stomach growling. Opening a small cupboard, she pulled out a half-empty tin of gari and a plastic bag of ground nuts. She fetched a cracked ceramic bowl, poured in the gari, and added water from a plastic keg. Musa peeked into the kitchen, curious. "No food again? Did you cook?" she snapped, not bothering to look at him as she sprinkled a handful of ground nuts into the bowl. "I thought you'd bring something back from school," Musa replied, scratching his head. Fatima scoffed. "Do I look like a cook? Or do you think the food at school falls from heaven?" Musa sighed and retreated to the living room. Fatima carried her bowl to the tiny dining table, dragging a chair that wobbled dangerously. She ate in silence, the cold gari and ground nuts, doing little to satisfy her hunger. As she chewed, her mother, a frail woman with tired eyes and a wrapper tied around her waist, entered the room. "Fatima, welcome. How was school today?" "Fine, Mama," she replied curtly, still chewing. Her mother's gaze fell on the designer dress. "You wore that expensive dress to school again? What's wrong with that?" Fatima snapped, her tone defensive. "You should be careful. People will start asking questions. Where do you think I'll find answers when they come here looking for the so-called big girl?" Fatima pushed the empty bowl away and stood up, avoiding her mother's eyes. "Nobody will come here, Mama. Just focus on your market stall and leave me to handle my life." Her mother sighed heavily. "You live a life of lies, Fatima. What will happen when the truth comes out?" Fatima grabbed her bag and headed to the small bedroom she shared with Musa. "The truth is overrated, Mama. Nobody cares about where you come from, only where you're going." As she shut the door behind her, she leaned against it, her confident facade crumbling in the dim light of the room. The weight of her double life pressed heavily on her chest. At school, she was Fatima the queen, the untouchable, the idol. At home, she was just another struggling girl in the slums of Lagos, surviving on gari and ground nuts. She flopped onto the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. "Tomorrow is another day," she muttered to herself, determination hardening her voice. "I'll make it out of here. I have to." But deep down, a nagging doubt whispered, At what cost? Fatima woke up to the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen and the faint smell of fried akara wafting through the air. She groaned, stretched, and rolled off the thin mattress. The room was dimly lit by sunlight filtering through a small broken window covered with an old newspaper. "Fatima, won't you get up and help around the house?" Her mother's voice rang from the kitchen. "I'm coming, Mama," she replied, reluctantly pulling on an old t-shirt and a pair of faded leggings. She tied a scarf around her head and stepped out into the small, cramped living room. Her mother was hunched over a pot of stew, stirring it with a wooden spoon. "Musa has already fetched water. Go and sweep the compound before you leave." Fatima grabbed a broom and stepped outside, muttering under her breath about how much she hated doing chores. The dusty compound was littered with scraps of paper, empty sachets of pure water, and the remnants of last night's meal. As she swept, neighbors passed by, greeting her with polite nods. "Ah, Fatima! Big girl of Lagos State University," one of them teased. She forced a smile. "Good morning, Auntie Iyabo." When she was done, she hurried back inside, washed her face, and grabbed her bag. "Mama, I'm going to Mary's place," she announced. "Be back early," her mother warned, not looking up from the pot. Fatima waved her off and stepped out into the bustling street. The sounds of hawkers calling out their wares, children playing, and distant music filled the air. She made her way to the bus stop and boarded a Danfo heading to Mary's neighborhood. Mary lived in Ikoyi, a world away from the chaos of Fatima's slum. The houses were mansions, the streets were clean, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass instead of open gutters. Fatima felt a pang of envy every time she came here, but she quickly pushed it aside. When she arrived at Mary's house, the gateman, who knew her well, let her in with a smile. "Madam Fatima, welcome-o," he said. "Thank you, Baba John," she replied, striding confidently to the front door. Mary opened the door before Fatima could knock. She was dressed in a simple tank top and shorts, her hair tied up in a messy bun. "Fatty!" Mary exclaimed, pulling her friend into a hug. "Mary, you know I hate that name," Fatima said, laughing despite herself. Come in," Mary said, dragging her inside. "You're here to raid my wardrobe again, aren't you?" Fatima grinned. "You know me too well." Mary led her upstairs to her walk-in closet, a space bigger than Fatima's entire house. The room was filled with rows of designer clothes, shelves of shoes, and racks of handbags. "Take whatever you want," Mary said, flopping onto a chaise lounge. "Just make sure you tag me when you post." Fatima started browsing through the clothes, picking out a few dresses, shoes, and handbags. "You're a lifesaver, Mary. How do you even keep track of all these things?" Mary shrugged. "I don't. My dad just keeps buying me more stuff. Speaking of which, you can take the white Range Rover if you want. I'm not using it this weekend." Fatima's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Of course," Mary said, tossing her the keys. "You're the best, Mary," Fatima said, hugging her. "I know," Mary replied, smirking. "Just don't crash it. My dad will kill me." After packing everything into the car, Fatima drove to a secluded spot in Ikoyi to take pictures for her social media pages. She changed outfits multiple times, posing against the car, in front of luxury stores, and at a fancy cafe. When she was done, she spent the rest of the day editing and uploading the photos. The captions read, "Lunch with the girls at the Artisan," "Weekend vibes in the Range Rover," "Dress by Gucci, bag by Chanel," #luxury lifestyle. The likes and comments poured in almost instantly. "Fatima, you're living the dream. Teach me your ways, queen. Future wife material." She smiled, watching her follower count climb. With every post, she felt like she was one step closer to the life she desperately wanted. Her small brand deals brought in just enough money to keep up appearances at school and contribute a little at home. But as she drove back to Mary's house to return the car, a thought nagged at her. How long could she keep up this charade? Would the glamorous world she showcased online ever become her reality? For now, she pushed those doubts aside. Tomorrow was another day, and Fatima Mohammed, the queen of Lagos State University, had an image to maintain. The night of the party was electric. The hall at Lagos State University's main campus had been transformed into a glittering venue. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling, music boomed from large speakers, and students dressed to impress filled the space. Laughing and dancing, Fatima walked in with her usual air of confidence, her borrowed designer dress hugging her curves and her makeup perfectly applied. As she moved through the crowd, all eyes seemed to turn to her. Is that Fatima? Wow, she looks stunning, one girl whispered. She always does, her friend replied. Fatima ignored the murmurs, her chin held high. This party wasn't just a social event for her. It was an opportunity. Fatima, a voice called out from the side. She turned to see Bola, a friend from one of her classes, waving at her. Bola wasn't just a classmate, she was one of the big girls on campus. Known for her lavish lifestyle and connections, Bola was someone Fatima had been trying to get close to for months. Bola, Fatima said with a smile, walking over to her. Bola was sitting on a plush couch in a corner of the hall, surrounded by two other girls. They all exuded wealth and confidence, their outfits shimmering under the party lights. Come, sit with us, Bola said, patting the seat beside her. Fatima sat down, her heart pounding. She knew this was her chance to break into their circle. Ladies, this is Fatima, Bola said, introducing her to the others. Fatima, meet Sandra and Naomi. Hi, Fatima said, her voice calm despite the excitement bubbling inside her. Fatima, the Queen of Lasu, Sandra said with a smirk. We've heard a lot about you. All good things, I hope, Fatima replied, flashing a confident smile. Naomi chuckled. Oh, definitely, you're quite popular, you know. But tell me, how do you manage to stay so exclusive? You're like a mystery. Fatima shrugged. I guess I just focus on myself, Bola laughed. That's what I like about you, Fatima. You've got that aura. But let me tell you something. Being exclusive is good, but being connected is better. Fatima tilted her head. What do you mean? Sandra leaned forward, her bracelets jangling. She means you've got potential, girl. But potential doesn't pay the bills. You've got the looks, the charm, and the brains. Now it's time to make them work for you. Fatima frowned slightly. I'm not sure I follow. Naomi smiled slyly. Let me break it down for you. There's a way to live the life you've been dreaming of without borrowing cars and clothes. Fatima's eyes widened. How do you know about that? Bola waved her hand dismissively. Relax, we all started somewhere. What matters is where you end up, and we can show you the way. Fatima hesitated. What exactly are you talking about? Sandra leaned back, crossing her legs. Men, Fatima. The kind of men who are willing to pay for your lifestyle in exchange for your dark company. Fatima felt her cheeks heat up. You mean sugar daddies? Call them sponsors, benefactors, whatever you want, Bola said. The point is, they have money, and they're looking for girls like us, beautiful, classy, and smart, Naomi chimed in. And don't think it's just about looks. These men want someone they can show off, someone who can hold a conversation and make them look good in public. Fatima's mind raced. She had heard rumors about girls on campus who lived off the wealth of older men, but she had never considered it for herself. I don't know, she said hesitantly. It sounds risky. Bola placed a hand on her shoulder. Everything in life has risks, Fatima. But think about it. Do you want to keep struggling, borrowing, and pretending? Or do you want to actually live the life you show off on Instagram? Sandra added, We're not saying you have to do anything you're uncomfortable with. You set your boundaries. But trust me, these men will give you more than you could ever imagine. Naomi nodded. Trips to Dubai, shopping sprees in Paris, the latest cars and gadgets, and all you have to do is be the queen you already are. Fatima looked around the room, her gaze falling on the glittering decorations and the girls dancing without a care in the world. She thought about her tiny room in the slums, the gari she had eaten for dinner, and the endless struggle to keep up appearances. How do I even get started? She asked quietly. Bola smiled, her eyes gleaming. Leave that to us. We'll introduce you to the right people. But first, you need to upgrade your game. New clothes, better makeup, and most importantly, confidence. Sandra grinned. You're already halfway there, Fatima. Stick with us, and you'll have everything you've ever wanted. Fatima hesitated for a moment before nodding. Okay, I'm in. The girls raised their glasses in a toast. To new beginnings, Bola said, clinking her glass against Fatima's. To living the life we deserve, Sandra added. Fatima sipped her drink, the sweet taste of possibility lingering on her lips. Deep down, she knew she was stepping into uncharted territory. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like the future she dreamed of was within reach. The days that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and trepidation. Fatima's mind raced with anticipation, her thoughts consumed by the promise of a life she had only ever dreamed about. The girls, Bola, Sandra, and Naomi, had promised her a way out, and now it was time to take the plunge. She kept thinking about the conversation at the party and how quickly they had turned her world upside down. They had all been so convincing, their confidence infectious. They had painted a picture of the life Fatima wanted, a life where money and luxury were as easy to come by as a swipe of the phone screen. Fatima sat on her bed in the cramped room she shared with her younger brother Musa, her thoughts swirling. She ran her hands over the borrowed designer dress she had worn to the party, feeling the smooth fabric between her fingers. It was beautiful, but it wasn't hers. It was just another piece of someone else's world. She longed for that world. The world Bola, Sandra, and Naomi were so easily a part of. The call came 2 days later. "Fatima, it's Bola." The voice on the other end of the line was calm but urgent. "Alhaji Bala wants to meet you. Are you ready?" Fatima's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected things to move so fast, but now that they were, there was no turning back. "I'm ready," she said, her voice betraying a mix of nerves and excitement. "Good. He's a powerful man, Fatima. Don't be intimidated, but respect him. Has been looking for someone like you." Fatima swallowed hard. "Where do I meet him?" "Just follow my lead." "Well, take care of the details. Meet us at the rooftop lounge at Eco Tower at 7 p.m. The line clicked off and Fatima was left staring at the phone in her hand. That evening, she put on her best borrowed dress, her hair styled to perfection, and stepped out of the house with a sense of determination. She could hear her mother shouting from the kitchen as she left. "Don't stay out too late, Fatima. I won't, Mama." Fatima called back, her mind already miles away from the house she had grown up in. The drive to Echo Tower felt surreal. Fatima felt like a different person, her heart racing with every kilometer she passed. The lights of Lagos sparkled in the distance, and the sound of honking cars filled the air. But all she could think about was the life that awaited her if everything went as planned. When she arrived, Bola was already waiting for her outside the entrance. She waved, a smile playing on her lips. "You look perfect," Bola said, her eyes scanning Fatima up and down with approval. "Thank you," Fatima replied, feeling the nerves in her stomach. They made their way up to the rooftop lounge, where the city of Lagos stretched out beneath them, a sea of twinkling lights and towering buildings. The lounge was a world of its own, with plush velvet seats, expensive-looking cocktails, and a crowd of well-dressed individuals who all seemed to know each other. At the far end of the room sat Alhaji Bala, a man in his late 50s with a commanding presence. His tailored suit was impeccable, and his sharp eyes seemed to see right through her. He was a man who had seen everything the world had to offer, and yet his attention was entirely focused on Fatima as she approached. Bola, Sandra, and Naomi stood by the bar, watching with knowing smiles. "Alhaji Bala." Bola greeted him with respect, her voice warm but deferential. "Ah, Bola." Alhaji Bala replied with a smile. His gaze turned to Fatima, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. "This must be the one." Fatima stepped forward, offering him a polite smile. "Good evening, Alhaji. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Ah, the pleasure is mine," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "I've heard much about you, Fatima. You've got what it takes to be a star." Fatima nodded, unsure of how to respond. Alhaji Bala's words were flattering, but she knew he wasn't just talking about her beauty. He was talking about what she could offer him. "I'm glad to hear that, Alhaji," she replied, her voice steady. He gestured for her to sit beside him. "Come, sit. Let's talk business." The night unfolded like a carefully orchestrated performance. Alhaji Bala's charm was undeniable, his words persuasive, and by the end of the evening, Fatima had agreed to a deal she couldn't refuse. "I'll make sure you never have to struggle again," Alhaji Bala said, his hand resting lightly on hers. "In exchange, I'll need you too. Accompany me to a few events, make appearances. You'll be well taken care of, Fatima." Fatima felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. It was happening. She had done it. She was about to enter a world where money, luxury, and power were hers for the taking. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Alhaji Bala lavished Fatima with gifts, designer clothes, trips to exclusive resorts, and access to circles she had never dreamed of entering. The more she spent time with him, the more she realized that she was exactly where she needed to be. But it wasn't just about her anymore. Fatima didn't forget her family. She couldn't. Her first call was to her mother. "Mama, I've got something for you. I want you to expand your shop. I'll send you some money." Her mother's voice trembled with disbelief. "Fatima, where did you get this money from?" Don't worry about that, Mama. Just use it well. I'll send more. The next week, Fatima made sure that Musa's school fees were taken care of. No more worrying about how to afford his textbooks or pay for his exams. The money from Alhaji Bala made it all possible. But the biggest surprise came when she bought a new house for her family. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a huge improvement from the cramped space they had been living in. Fatima smiled as she handed her mother the keys, watching her face light up with joy. "I've always dreamed of something better, Mama. Now it's real," she said softly. Her mother hugged her tightly, her tears wetting Fatima's shoulder. "Thank you, my child. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to, Mama. Just know that things are better now." Fatima stood at the door, watching her mother and brother settle into their new home. For the first time, she felt like she was on the path to something great. But deep down, a small part of her couldn't shake the feeling that the life she had created was built on a foundation of compromises and choices she would have to live with forever. The invitation came in a gold-embossed envelope delivered to Fatima's door. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, and the weight of it alone made her heart race. Inside, an invitation to an exclusive soiree shimmered in elegant cursive. Alhaji Bala cordially invites you to an evening of celebration and splendor. Fatima sat on the edge of her bed, holding the card in her trembling hands. She had grown used to the luxuries Alhaji Bala provided, but this invitation felt different. It carried an unspoken importance, a weight that made her stomach twist. The night of the party, Fatima prepared herself with care. She chose a flowing emerald gown, its fabric hugging her figure in all the right places, and adorned her neck with a diamond necklace Alhaji Bala had gifted her the week before. Her makeup was flawless, her heels sharp and commanding. She looked every bit the part of the elite guest Alhaji Bala wanted by his side. When Alhaji's sleek black car arrived at her door, she stepped in gracefully, offering him a practiced smile. "You look stunning," Alhaji said, his eyes sweeping over her. "Thank you, Alhaji," she replied, her tone polite and measured. The drive to the venue was quiet, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. The mansion they arrived at was unlike anything Fatima had ever seen. Its towering gates were adorned with intricate designs, and the sprawling estate beyond was illuminated like a palace. As they approached the entrance, a uniformed gateman stepped forward, his eyes widening as he took in Fatima's elegance. She smiled warmly and slipped a crisp bill into his hand. "Thank you, Ma," he whispered, bowing slightly. Fatima was about to step inside when the gateman leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "Madam, please, be careful tonight," he said, his tone trembling. "This party, it's not what you think. It's dangerous. They don't just celebrate here. People disappear." Fatima froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The gateman glanced around nervously before continuing. "Organ harvesting. This is not a normal party. Once you enter, there's no way out. Please, Ma, leave now." Fatima's breath caught in her throat. She glanced back at Alhaji, who was waiting for her near the grand entrance, chatting casually with another guest. She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Thank you," she whispered to the gateman. "I'll handle it." Fatima knew she had to act quickly. Her mind raced as she approached Alhaji, her face calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "Alhaji," she said, her voice smooth. "I need to fix my makeup before we go in. It'll be just a minute." He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Don't take too long. This is an important night." She smiled, turning away and heading toward a side path she had spotted earlier. Her heels clicked softly against the stone pavement as she made her way to the edge of the property. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart pounding with every step. Once she was far enough from the entrance, she broke into a run, her gown billowing behind her as she sprinted toward the main road. The sound of laughter and music from the mansion faded into the distance as she put as much space as she could between herself and the horrors she had narrowly escaped. Fatima didn't stop running until she reached a small, dimly lit street. She leaned against a wall, gasping for breath, her mind reeling. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, and she fumbled to answer it. It was Bola. "Fatima, where are you?" Bola's voice was frantic. "They're about to start some kind of ritual or something. This isn't what we thought it was." "I know," Fatima said, her voice shaking. "Bola, you need to get out of there, now." I can't, Bola whispered. They've locked the doors. Fatima, I'm scared. The line went dead. Panic surged through Fatima as she dialed the emergency police line. She gave them the address of the mansion, her voice trembling as she explained what was happening. There are people in danger. You have to hurry, she pleaded. The officer assured her that help was on the way, but Fatima's mind was consumed with guilt and fear. She had escaped, but her friends were still trapped. Hours later, Fatima sat in her tiny bedroom, staring blankly at the wall. She had locked the doors and drawn the curtains, her body still trembling from the night's events. Her phone buzzed again, and she hesitated before answering. It was the police. We raided the mansion, the officer said. We found your friends, but I'm sorry, ma'am. Not all of them made it. Fatima's heart shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she thanked the officer and ended the call. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized the cost of the life she had been chasing. The luxury, the money, the power, it had all come at a price she could no longer afford. Fatima knew she had to change. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. But the guilt of leaving her friends behind would haunt her forever. The sun cast its golden rays over Lagos as Fatima stood outside her modest but thriving clothing boutique. The sign above the shop read, Fatima's Finesse, hand-painted in vibrant colors. It was a dream she never thought she could achieve, but here it was, a fresh start built on her own terms. She had used the last of Alhaji Bala's money to rent the shop, buy sewing machines, and hire 2 assistants. It wasn't a grand empire, but it was hers. Every day, customers walked in to browse the elegant, affordable clothes she curated and designed herself. Madam, this style is selling out fast. Oh, one of her assistants, Aisha, said, holding up a sleek Ankara dress. That's good, Fatima replied, her tone warm but focused. Make sure we reorder more fabric by tomorrow. She turned to a customer who was inspecting a blouse. You'll look amazing in that. The color complements your skin perfectly, she said, flashing a genuine smile. The customer laughed. You have an eye for these things, Fatima. No wonder your shop is always full. Fatima thanked her, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. It was a different kind of satisfaction, one that came from hard work and honesty. That evening, as the shop closed, Fatima sat behind the counter, counting the day's earnings. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to pay her bills, support her family, and keep the business running. Her mother, who now sold provisions in a larger shop Fatima had helped her set up, was thriving. Her younger brother had returned to school and was preparing for his final exams. The house they had moved into, though modest, was filled with love and laughter. Fatima was content. One day, as she locked up the shop, she noticed a familiar face across the street. It was Bola, one of her friends who had survived the horrors of the mansion that night. Fatima? Bola called out, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and relief. Fatima smiled, walking over to embrace her. Bola, it's been so long. I heard about your boutique, Bola said, her eyes scanning the storefront. You've done well for yourself. It wasn't easy, Fatima admitted, but I needed to leave that life behind. I couldn't go back, not after what happened. Bola nodded, her expression somber. I still have nightmares about that night. Me too, Fatima said, her voice trembling. I think about the others every day. I wish I could have done more to save them. You did what you could, Bola said, placing a hand on her shoulder. You called the police. Without you, I wouldn't be here. That night, Fatima sat on her bed, staring at an old photo of herself with her former friends. They were all smiling, dressed in the luxurious clothes that once defined their lives. But now, that life felt distant, like a dream or a nightmare. She whispered a prayer for her friends who hadn't made it, vowing to honor their memory by living a life of integrity and purpose. Months turned into years, and Fatima's boutique grew. She expanded her business to include a tailoring school for young women in her community, teaching them skills to build their own futures. One evening, as she walked home, the sound of children playing in the streets filled the air. She smiled, clutching her bag tightly. She didn't have the designer gowns or flashy cars anymore, but what she had was far more valuable: peace, purpose, and self-respect. Fatima never forgot the lessons she had learned or the price she had paid for chasing a life that wasn't hers. But she knew one thing for certain: she was finally free. The end. Please subscribe to our channel to support us.